a.m. here in Gyeongju, South Korea, where the APEC CEO Summit is underway. You just saw President Lee there speaking and wrapping up his keynote speech. They're really kicking off APEC here. President Trump also expected to have a speech and gathering here later on this morning ahead, of course, of that highly anticipated meeting on Thursday with Xi Jinping. You're watching The China Show. I'm Yvonne Man.
And I'm David Ingles here in Hong Kong, where markets are shut. We are counting down still, though, to the open of trade in Shanghai and also in Shenzhen. Our top stories today: Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung are set to meet as both sides hammer out details of their trade deal, including a $350 billion investment pledge. Now, across markets, stocks across the Asia Pacific rising after a tech-driven rally on Wall Street. Nvidia's Jensen Huang downplaying AI bubble fears as he announces a flurry of new partnerships.
AI has now become good enough because of reasoning capability, research capabilities, its ability to think. It's now generating tokens and now generating intelligence that's worth paying for.
And that AI boom is propelling a 62% jump in profits at SK Hynix and sales of its entire memory chip lineup for next year. Plus, China pledging to significantly boost the share of consumption in its economy over the next 5 years.
Well, good morning. We are taking the China Show here at the APEC CEO Summit in Gyeongju, South Korea. Here, we're 230 miles away from Seoul here, so quite a bit of a trek for us to even get to this city. But certainly, it's one that marks one of cultural heritage and why it was chosen really for the APEC Summit. But certainly, we've been talking about the logistical sort of, I guess you could say here, the issues here, just even getting here. But yes, it all kind of leads up to what we're seeing here, of course, an anticipated meeting between President Trump and Xi. But before that, we are going to be seeing a meeting between the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung with President Trump first. The President Lee just kicking off with his opening remarks here at the APEC Summit and really talking about supply chains here. Cooperation is critical, he says, when it came to supply chains. I'm here, of course, with my colleague, Asia Trade co-host Sherry Yan. She's here. Yeah, we talked about the cold.
Yeah,
but even
I was
just
going to say,
yes.
You forgot the cold because it's freezing every time in South Korea.
But yes, but even just talking about how we even got here, right? We're talking about 20,000 visitors that are here at APEC. I think 700 of them are global leaders. And this is just not a city fit for an event like this.
You drove, 6 hours yesterday?
4.5.
4.5 hours from Seoul. I took a 2-hour train yesterday, but 20,000 visitors expected this year in Gyeongju. Yes, it's historical. We're talking about UNESCO sites everywhere. And it was assigned by the former president, Yoon Suk-yeol's government before it was ousted. So President Lee Jae-myung had to come in and try to deal with the logistics of this place.
Couldn't change the venue.
No,
couldn't
change the venue at the last minute, but we did see them trying to really overcome the lack, for example, of hotel rooms. They brought in cruise ships that we haven't seen since Papua New Guinea in 2018, for example.
Yeah, we have make it more luxury, right? A unique experience.
Make it more luxury. It's an experience coming to Gyeongju, staying on a cruise ship. We are expecting that President Lee Jae-myung bilateral with President Trump, and the logistics, the visuals will be key. We're expecting the South Koreans to present and gift a crown made of gold that's a replica from the Silla dynasty.
Yeah, and that's after the gold baseball, I think, the Prime Minister Takaichi gave in Japan. So certainly we're seeing some more of these gifts and ways to charm the president, because they really do, the South Koreans, need to finalize this trade deal.
It's interesting that you mentioned Japan, because that's the comparison,
yes.
Right? I mean, the $550 billion investment deal that Japan has, they finalized the trade deal. Their tariffs on cars are already down to 15%. South Korea is still suffering from 25% tariffs, despite the fact that they said that they had an agreement back in July. I spoke to President Yi last week, and he talked about these key sticking points that remain for the $350 billion investment fund. And of course, it's a tricky situation because South Korea also faced that humiliating immigration raid in the South Korean plants in Georgia, right? So the criticism within the country was big to really scrutinize this deal.
It already soured relations, leading up to this, right? So can we see a bit of a repair in that relationship and really can give a bit more of a competitive edge to the Korean automakers out there because of what was discussed with Japan, which brought those levies down to 15%. If we don't get a deal with Korea, those levies stay at 25%. That meeting between Lee and Trump is the appetizer, right? We talk about it. The main course, though, is going to happen on Thursday between President Trump and Xi. And I think, what we're hearing so far is that we need some details. We need some commitments in numbers on what really was discussed in Kuala Lumpur, and can we actually see some sort of signed agreement between the both sides?
Perhaps low-hanging fruits are the results of this APEC, or at least the targets for this APEC, because President Yi and President Trump are expected to sign a deal, more cooperation on AI, quantum computing, 6G. With China and President Xi Jinping, perhaps a purchase agreement when it comes to soybeans. We know that China has not bought any U.S. soy in this harvest season. They bought about 20% of the U.S. total crops last year. Will we see some numbers that could potentially be something similar to phase one of the trade deal that they signed back in 2020 of $200 billion purchases by China for U.S. goods over 2 years? But then even that is tricky because right now President Trump has opened an investigation on whether or not Beijing has complied with that deal. Will we see something on fentanyl? Will we see something on more difficult issues like export controls? Rare earths, of course, is key.
That's the big sticking point, right? Because the U.S. suggests that, the Chinese are willing to defer those export controls on critical minerals for a year. The readouts that we saw so far from Beijing don't mention that in particular here. They just mentioned export curbs in general. There was some sort of consensus. So anything to confirm what we've heard from Scott Bessent, of course, the Treasury Secretary, is going to be quite key. And of course, when it comes to export curbs in the U.S. as well, because we were coming into APEC thinking that what did China get out of Malaysia here, right? Is there any sort of need in terms of export curbs around software and the like that are going to be pushed back and retracted as well? That's going to be very key here in the next few days. So certainly as we track what President Trump is doing, he's expected to land here in Gyeongju in about an hour or so here. We just saw those live pictures of him taking off out of Japan. Certainly that's going to be the key focus, Dave, and really whether we see a signed agreement, maybe some sort of readout, and maybe some numbers behind what we saw from Malaysia.
Yeah, and we'll see, of course. And, let me just borrow the analogy you guys used. I know it's cold there. And certainly the narrative that markets are running with is the temperature has been really taken down more than a notch as it pertains to these two, right? So let's hope that these sort of Goldilocks conditions can continue when you look at these markets, whether that's the event risk, this wall of event risk that we're facing, don't seem to be a big issue when you look at price right now. Asia Pacific benchmark, we're just doing a quick glance at these markets and really just, are we being lulled into a false sense of caution, security? That's a question mark, not a statement, because certainly when you look at these markets, we're doing very well. We're continuing this tech-driven momentum overnight. In fact, just a bit on that very note, when you look at South Korea, and we'll talk about this in a moment, SK Hynix is flying 3.5% to the upside. We're coming off highs of the day on the Kospi, which was higher by over 1%. In the opening minutes. Gold, that's the other side to the momentum trade. So we are down 3. We could be down a 4th. We'll see what happens, of course, when you look at something like spot, for example. We were down by a 4th about a few minutes ago. Very quickly, the approach to the open today, again, it's worth pointing out that Hong Kong is shut today. So you don't have a lot of volume. You don't have the stock connect today. We have a few contracts. A50 is pointing to still some gains at the open today. We've taken out the 710 handle on dollar China, on both, by the way, offshore and onshore. So the fixing will be very much in focus as well. We just showed you there. We'll talk more about this later. Longer dated bonds in China are now hitting multi-week lows. Now, on that note, you have shares of SK Hynix up over 3%, reporting better than expected 3Q profits. Yu Kyung Lee is with us right now. Our Asia stocks reporter to help us understand this AI boom that continues, and really, Yukyung, these numbers and the guidance, and in particular, the guidance they gave on 2026 that sales for next year have been pretty much booked out, really underscores this AI boom.
Absolutely, David. And I think just a few minutes ago, we also had some guidance about 2027. The SK Hynix official said during the earnings conference call that the demand is going to surpass supply for a while, and supply is not going to catch up demand in the short term. So they even expect pretty robust demand for 2027. And that headline just landed a few minutes ago, giving further a lift to the SK Hynix shares, which are up already 3 times this year alone. And still, JP Morgan in the report yesterday said is one of its most favorite stocks in South Korea is SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics, saying that the level of Kospi is still cheaper after its world-beating gains of up about 70%.
Yukyung, fantastic. Thank you so much. Yukyung Lee, our Asia Stocks reporter, on one of the big tech stories today, which underscores this massive tech rally we're still seeing here in the region. On the back, and on top of that, of course, the other big one overnight, Nvidia, the CEO, Jensen Huang, who, by the way, is, of course, I believe also headed, if not already in Korea for the APEC CEO Summit, downplaying these fears of a bubble in the AI sector. Let's bring in our executive editor for Asian markets, Paul Dobson, in Singapore for us this morning. Paul, good morning. How is the team looking at this tech-driven rally, again, juxtaposed against this wall of event risk, whether that's geopolitics, monetary policy, or a ton of earnings coming through, Paul?
Yeah, morning, David. Well, as the ton of earnings, I think that the market is most excited or paying most attention to, especially when we're getting these continuing upbeat statements from companies. SK Hynix is a really good example, as Yukyung was explaining. Sold out already for the year ahead. It's basically the same as what Jensen Huang was saying about Nvidia as well, kind of an unprecedented boom in demand for their chips through 2026. So the idea is that, people are worried and questioning the rally and talking about, is this a bubble? But the fact of the matter is that the companies that are making the chips are coining in money at the moment, earning that revenue, and that's why their valuations continue to push up. And I think that, if you're looking forwards to the earnings, then the fact that they're projecting so much confidence in the run-up to it gives you a pretty good clue that it's not going to be a terrible set of results, right? The only thing is, where are we with the expectations? And I come on talk to you every 3 months just ahead of the earnings. We always say lofty expectations, can they possibly be? We know lofty expectations with justification, but it's the same old thing. The market is valuing it so highly already that in order for the market to be impressed with what they say, it's still got to be something special or spectacular.
Fantastic context there, Paul, certainly. When you look at, almost every quarter, lofty expectations, but here we are, and the stock is pretty much at highs. So it's an extremely busy docket, Paul, the next, let's call it 2-3 days. What else are we missing? What else is important here?
Yeah, so the Fed, of course, coming up today. It's pretty clear that they're going to cut interest rates. The market is very convinced about that. What will be interesting is whether they are definitive in ending QT as well. That seems to have just come really to the fore in the past couple of weeks, and now the market is absolutely convinced it's going to happen. So if they do disappoint on that front, then there may be some interesting reaction at the back end of the yield curve. People talking about what it means for the swap spread as well, the difference between interest rate swaps and the US Treasuries market. So there'll be some attention on that. And any guidance that we get for the Fed about how far it's looking to cut in the year ahead as well. Now, probably Powell will want to avoid talking about that too much. But this is what the market's keyed in on. We're fully priced for a cut in, this meeting and again in December and probably January as well. Will the market gain confidence that the Fed is determined to be in a longer-term cutting cycle? That's what we'll be watching for.
Paul, thank you so much. Paul Dobson in Singapore for us. Counting down to the open of trade in Shanghai and in Shenzhen. That's another way of saying a public service reminder that Hong Kong is shut today. This is the China Show. Right. This is arguably the the unsung hero of risk appetite, the anchor of risk appetite, the stronger fixings coming through this last 3 days. It's noticeably stronger this week. Another 708 handle as far as the currency is concerned. And I guess on that note, we'll see what this looks like. 710, of course, we broke that in offshore and also on the onshore exchange rate. Yes, and we'll see what the onshore opens up today. Yvonne.
Yeah, we're just getting some lines here. President Trump is expected to arrive in South Korea's Gimhae airport at 10:30 a.m. times. I'm guessing that's local time, according to some local media. So certainly we are, of course, anticipating his arrival here. These opening ceremonies have just kicked off here. So what we're looking at to next is, of course, President Trump meeting with the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. And then, yes, that next day it's going to be with President Trump. So we're also expecting to hear of Trump to address the APEC CEO summit in Gyeongju here. Let's get more on what's at stake with our next guest. John Denton is Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, and he joins us here. John, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be with you.
So obviously there's a lot of anticipation. We come off of Malaysia, Japan with very positive vibes, and it seems like both sides, U.S. and China, have really brought down the temperature in the last few days. What are you expecting to come out of Gyeongju?
Well, I mean, what am I expecting? In a way, what are we expecting? Like the International Chamber of Commerce, we're in 170 countries, okay? 70% in the global south. So when we speak, I'm kind of channeling, I suppose, the most inclusive business voice. What we want is to get some certainty, because the interesting thing for us is, having spent a lot of time in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East and elsewhere, just talking to business there and then surveying them, the number one concern they actually have is actually not tariffs, so they hate them. It's actually uncertainty. So getting a level of certainty around what the framework will look like moving forward is critical. And I think, funnily enough, even though it's quite complicated being in Gyeongju, when you think about the history of this place as kind of a calm kind of center where agreements were capable of being met. Historically in Korea, we actually paved the way for the development of Korea as a state.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good omen. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, a good omen. And also APEC, APEC has that kind of collaborative, friendly feel about it because it's voluntary rather than compulsory.
Yeah.
And so there is a kind of good environment here if they want to find a way to create some order. I mean, our job in the end of the ICC, because of the size and the heft we have, is that when governments can't act, we actually work to create order where there is disorder and try and create certainty.
Yeah.
So we're pushing for the certainty issue really for business.
Certainty around what in particular? If it's not tariffs, what is the big thing that could be something that you can kind of make the investment decisions on?
And the big issue for us is, what is the system emerging going to look like? Is it actually going to be relevant to business, or is it going to be some abstract kind of political play or geopolitical play? I mean, one of the things that really puzzles us is when you even look at the development of some of the most significant trading arrangements, like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, is that, even though governments think they've done this amazing thing, because they haven't really engaged business, there's very little use of these kind of assets that are built by government. So what we want to do is actually be part of the creation of what will be the new paradigm around the global system, trading system. Because ultimately for us, what we want is economic activity, because that's what drives opportunity and growth and jobs, frankly, for families.
Obviously, many companies out there are talking about restructuring supply chains, for resilience. How do you balance this push for friendshoring, sort of trade blocks, for example, without kind of this risk of fragmentation in the global economy?
Well, having a common framework actually does eradicate a lot of the risk around fragmentation. But there is no doubt that what we're seeing at the moment is actually an erosion of the system, which is actually leading to, I think, quite a challenge.
Yeah.
So what we are feeling already is the development of a level of inefficiency. Frankly, I think whatever emerges will be less efficient than what we've got at the moment.
Yeah.
It will actually be less, I think, supportive of making rapid decisions, because ultimately people are going to have to start looking at moving their supply chains around, and that's really hard to do. And that's why there is a level of reticence at the moment by business. And what you're seeing is, you're not seeing supply chains moving. What you're really seeing is people looking for new markets, and you're also seeing people delaying decisions about those big investment choices, about reordering of their supply chains, because it's just so hard to do.
Yeah, and I'm looking at just kind of Nexperia, that's an example that comes to mind, and what we've seen from the Dutch government, that you are seeing non-U.S., non-Chinese governments and companies really caught in the crosshairs of this trade war here right now. How do you even manage or even hedge that risk now as a company?
Well, I think this is the whole challenge of actually developing, I think, a forward-looking view about it. That's why the uncertainty is such a problem, people. What is that forward-looking? You look at the experience of Nexperia and the Dutch government stepping on the basis of what they said was governance concerns there. In the interventions of governments without actually fully understanding how business operates can also be problematic. And what we're seeing at the moment is the world shifts from like geopolitics to geoeconomics, is that governments have not shifted the way in which they actually develop their policies. Yeah, okay, national security is number one, but you can only have a strong security system when you have a strong economy. So even when you're making decisions around national security and economic, interventions, you actually need to consult with business about what's really going on. Because how does the Nexperia supply chain actually work? Do they fully understand that? So I think there's really important issues about business now being much more integrated into decision making, particularly on the frameworks go forward, which is what I was trying to explain before.
Right.
Whatever system emerges now, and that's what we're really interested in, it's got to be capable of solving real business problems, not political problems. And that's what we're really focused on.
John, it's great to have you. John Denton there, International Chamber of Commerce Secretary General, joining us here at the APEC CEO Summit. We got plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Right, welcome back. Counting down to the open of mainland markets. A lot of earnings have come through yesterday. We'll talk more about this. So the likes of Bank of China, Ping An are opening up in mainland China. We'll see what earnings reaction looks like on the back of those numbers. I think Ping An was an 11% pop in business. Bank of China is about 5%, give or take there. In terms of sectors that we're tracking, so gold on the back of this 3-day decline, and then we're stable, but looks like we're seeing some downside pressure. More than the opposite this morning. There's this detailed report and paper to underscore this boost towards not just simply boosting consumption short term, but the role of consumption as far as the larger pie and output is concerned. That's one sector to watch. 4,000 is a level we're tracking. We were briefly above that level for, I think, about an hour or so in a session yesterday, including the lunch break. So we'll see whether or not we are able to cross that and close above it is the other thing altogether. Futures are pointing higher, 0.4%. Another strong fix coming through out of the PBOC. And, of course, what is also worth pointing out is longer dated yields. You have the 10 and also the 30-year are not trading at about multi-week lows. The opening bell is coming up next. This is the China Show.
Welcome back. You're watching the China Show. We're kind of on the open of markets. Of course, Hong Kong markets are shut here today for a public holiday, but here in Gyeongju, South Korea, it is all eyes on President Trump, all eyes on President Xi when both those leaders arrive here in this cold, chilly city here, hopefully willing to bring down the temperature when it comes to trade tensions here. But really, when it comes to global investors, Dave, I think a lot of foreign investors are really getting used to this sort of new regime, right? You know, when it comes to tension, escalate, then de-escalate. This sort of mantra here. Maybe that we're not as shocked by the headlines that we're seeing around trade these days.
Yeah, kind of like heart rate or your pulse, blood pressure. I think what's consistent, what's really needed is a lower for longer as it comes to those things. And we do understand. I think Yvonne, you were just mentioning this earlier on. I think any minute now that the U.S. president is set to land in Korea. So we'll obviously bring you guys up to speed as far as that's concerned. Markets are doing very well. So we're now about 10 points of that 4,000 handle. The Chinix index is leading the way early on in onshore markets. Again, worth pointing out that Hong Kong is shut today So no markets here. Now, earnings story. So you have everything from Maotai to Shandong Gold leading those names. Midea, of course, which is a consumption name. There's a consumption theme also today. Min will tell us about that in a moment. Mainland sectors to watch, including consumption. Early on, we're looking at some pressure there. IT actually was doing okay yesterday. We're doing better today. And materials were down substantially. Yesterday, Jiangxi copper, non-ferrous metals were some of the constituents. There we're seeing some pressure. Well, the opposite of such. Earnings. Okay, earnings reaction to be more specific. We talked about Jiangxi copper, ZTE, that's a miss. Bank of China, Ping An, not a lot of reaction there. And of course, we're also looking at a currency, 10-day look at dollar onshore. And as you can see, the rightmost side of your screens, there's really this noticeable pivot to the lower end of that range. We're now at we're below 710. Yet again, we broke that level, of course, over the last 24 hours or so. Now, does a stronger currency certainly help the consumption story? You look at your economics theory, certainly it does. And just on that story, right? So China has pledged and has more details now on this exercise to boost domestic consumption over the next 5 years here, while keeping tech, manufacturing as top priorities. The Communist Party also pledging, the pledge there aims to reduce reliance on exports after trade tensions escalated sharply this year. Let's bring in Min Lo, our China correspondent, to just help us understand what these measures are that the government's talking about to boost this consumption drive.
Yeah, it's interesting when you did a market check earlier, the consumer staples index and the consumer discretionary actually still pointing down, and perhaps markets are not too impressed by what we're seeing out of the readout here. This is a more comprehensive document after what we got from the communique of the fourth plenum, and the government clearly putting the priority squarely on boosting consumption and its share of the GDP. Currently, it stands at 40%, which is far below the global average of 56%, so still a long way to go there. In terms of how they're going to do it, they're going to improve people's livelihood, spend more on public spending, for example, promote employment, increase or improve those income distribution. But exactly how they're going to do that, the details are still a bit lacking at this moment. They also touch on the anti-inflation campaign, promoting healthy competition that is based on quality rather than price. But again, analysts are saying that the language is perhaps not strong enough. It's suggesting that maybe the government might discourage investment into overcrowded sectors, but not necessarily maybe close off those excess capacity. But clearly, President Xi did make a speech, and he said that China needs to double down on strengthening its domestic economy in order to counter all of these external uncertainties.
Yeah, maybe before I ask you about the follow-up question, I just need to correct myself. I mentioned that U.S. President Trump is set to arrive any minute now. Correct myself. I forget. What time is it, Min?
9:30.
9:30. Okay, so I'm 1 hour ahead of schedule here. He's set to arrive in the next hour. Thank you so much for the time check. So, okay, tech self-reliance. What do we know about that?
Yeah, obviously tech self-reliance is still the number one priority. That's still ranking above consumption.
Okay.
And it's coming against this backdrop. As you said, President Trump landing in South Korea in about an hour or so. He is expected to sign a tech pact with South Korea in areas of AI, quantum computing, 6th gen mobile technology. And these are the very same areas that China wants to also ramp up investment and have breakthroughs in, especially in core technologies in areas like new materials and new energy, mobile technology as well. So obviously the tech race is ramping up. We're watching closely this US-China trade talk, because one of the big factors that are affecting tens of thousands of Chinese companies now is the US expanding the rules around the entity list to include the affiliates of those companies on the list. And many companies that are now, have already separated their sort of business operations from their affiliates, they are being affected in their overseas expansion, a lot of scrutiny on their operations, and this is what China has been very upset about. So as part of its efforts to really bolster its resilience, one of it is discussing with the US to get those export controls undone, but at the same time also trying to improve its own capacity when it comes to these advanced technology.
Min, thank you so much. Min Lo, our China correspondent there. Joining us from Singapore is John Lin, AllianceBernstein, CIO for EM, emerging markets, value equities, and also Chinese equities. John, good morning from Hong Kong. Thank you for joining us. Yvonne is joining us from Korea as well, where I think something else is going on. John, let me just start with the reason I bring Yvonne up and the events in South Korea. Markets don't seem to be treating geopolitical risk as a material risk or event. Do you think this approach, how sanguine markets seem to be over geopolitics. Does that make sense to you?
Good morning, David. It's always good to be here. I think so, is the short answer. The ping-ponging of sentiment has been going on for quite some time. This term, in President Trump's second term, if you don't count the first term, where, I'm no expert, but as an outside observer, it seems to me that there are a group of national security hawks who will stop by nothing other than very, very severe policies or sanctions toward China. And there are another group of advisors around President Trump that seems to just want to carry out normal policies according to their agenda, but they want the economy to sort of hold up and do fine. And so when it comes to trade policies or industrial policies between U.S. and China, or on the U.S. side, it seems to be bouncing around. And so from our point of view is we've been thinking that when policies look great, don't get too relaxed, because there's probably a round down the corner that will scare people a little bit. And when people are pulling their hair out in despair, don't worry so much, because things are probably not as bad as they seem. But you know what? Like, leaning against that consensus in order to make money seems to be harder now, because many people in the market are doing the same thing we have been doing.
Okay, so does that make you rethink that strategy then, or do you continue to lean into it? It's delivered to your, which you alluded to there just now, John.
Yeah, I think it's harder than before, certainly, to do that strategy, and which means that I think the market is increasingly pricing in that ping-ponging of sentiment, and it just become sort of a normal Tuesday, if you will. The way we sort of frame this around, if you look back 15, 20 years, seems to be, North Korea testing their missiles, for example. I mean, can you remember how many missiles North Korea have fired in the last 24 months? I can't, and so I think the market is getting used to it.
Yeah, I can't either, John. I have to ask you, you mentioned that this rally that we're seeing in China, most have thought that this is liquidity driven, but you're saying actually there is a bit more fundamental aspect to it, that you are finally starting to see some ROE and EPS revisions to the upside on certain sectors. Can you tell us what you're seeing, and what parts of the market are you seeing that most pronounced?
Yeah, indeed. It's still very early days, and depending on the industry and the companies, the trajectory are still pretty murky and kind of different. But there are some signs the offshore part of MSCI China, the ROE seems to have bottomed. Now, we don't know if that's a temporary bottom or that things keep declining. But that bottoming is forming around particularly some of the industries where you see more beneficiaries from the tech spending. The big AI push is not just taking place in the US, it's taking place in China as well. And so sort of that renewed capital spending is helping a segment of companies and seeing revenues rebound. And anti-involution policies, again, still early days, but that's also starting to form a bottom in some of the really cutthroat competition that we're seeing in some of the industries, and stopping that price decline or price war. And hopefully over time that also leads to a bottom in terms of return for those companies.
Yeah, in terms of the AI play, I mean, if you look across the entire supply chain, how do you position around that now? Because we've been talking about how expensive these sort of chip plays of foundries are. Where's sort of the next sort of way to lean into this theme?
Yeah, indeed. The AI sort of market has arrived in Asia or in China as well. So for us humble value investors, it's certainly not the easiest market to operate in, because the market attention is so focused on a narrow set of companies. And you're right. I think some of the leading semiconductor companies, the chip makers, etc., are getting really expensive. And we're talking about 300-400 times price to earnings, for example. Those valuations in China make Nvidia look downright a bargain. right? And so we tend to look at the secondary place, the PCB makers, the server assemblers, the optical transceiver makers. That you can't make an AI server work with just the chips, right? You need everything else, very sophisticated PCB boards, for the chips to sit down, for example, for AIs to work. And those tend to be the place that we're hunting for ideas because their valuation on a relative basis are much easier to stomach.
John, hold on a second. We're getting some lines here from President Trump on Air Force One as he makes his way here to South Korea. And he was talking about this trip with Japan, where he said it was a great trip to Japan. He reiterates this investment with Toyota. And when he comes to the Xi meeting on Thursday, he's expecting to be lowering that fentanyl tariff. We did see some early reports from the Journal, for example, that mentioned that those levies could be brought down to 10% here, given China's commitment to try to control some of these kind of precursor chemicals that go into fentanyl. So maybe there is some progress on this front. So expect China to help with the fentanyl situation. That's going to make a big step with fentanyl, he says, and they are working something out with rare earths, right? There has been a lot of anticipation that those rare earth export curbs that China implemented just a few weeks ago, that could be delayed or pushed back in some ways here. The U.S. and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, mentioned that it could be a deferral of 1 year. We have not gotten that confirmation from the Chinese side here. So maybe this is the trade-off that we're seeing here, right? So lowering fentanyl tariffs on China and maybe something could come out with rare earths. But the fentanyl issue seems to be kind of front and center now. And, what was 20% tariffs, we might see that lower. We'll see if it's 10%. We'll see what level that is, Dave. But this could be seen as a pretty easy and quick win for China.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you brought that up because I think when you tie in, and I'm going to tie in what we're hearing domestically as a story in China today, right? Our other top story, apart from everything else that's going on the geopolitical front, is this detailed document that outlines China's plan, that readout that we had last week out of the fourth plenum, the 5-year plan, right? This detailed plan on how to get consumption to become a bigger part of the economic pie. And there is a geopolitical implication there, right? Because Scott Bessent, U.S. officials have been pushing China to rebalance its economy away from exports into something there. So, that actually is and should come in line as far as aligning the stars geopolitically is concerned. John Lin is still with us, of course, out of Singapore. John, apologies for that interruption, but I'm not sure if you heard just our comments now between Yvonne and myself talking about this consumption theme, that we're starting to get more meat on the bones on this plan here. Is there anything actionable from an investor point of view near term on this plan? We all know, of course, that's the intention, to make consumption big. But is there anything actionable specifically at this point in time there, John?
Well, I think we have to see some of the details when they do come out. But from our point of view, observing other economies and other governments trying to push consumption, it's rather difficult. It's like pushing on a string. And historically, what needs to happen is for people's income to go up meaningfully. It's for the social safety net to meaningfully protect people so that folks in the economy feel comfortable spending money. Now, those things take time. Now, I would imagine that those are going to be forming a significant part of the policy push in China as well, right? Get wage up, get protections, retirement benefits, and those things up. And so folks feel more comfortable spending the giant amount of savings that Chinese households have in the banks right now. Those things take time. So, other than an immediate bounce in the market, that sort of always happens when news like this come out, for a day or two or three. What we really need to see are those policies that come out, and the beneficiaries that might fall out of that could span not just the consumption names, but also, folks or companies that help those drives, right? Insurance companies, for example, if there are really policies to push social safety net, for example.
Right. John, final question for you, sir. I mean, we've herded you into specific topics and maybe more on the shorter term side of things. this slow bull market, so assuming this is correct, it's a multi-year run for value investors like yourself. I imagine this is going to be a fantastic trend to follow. What do you like specifically at this point in time?
Yeah, at this point in time, where we found a lot of very interesting ideas sort of shake out of different parts of policies and economies. On the one hand, you have anti-involution policies, early days, but if they are implemented the way they are meant to be implemented, places like non-ferrous metal, copper makers or cobalt miners and aluminum smelters, or even hog and chicken farmers will probably see supply cuts to the industry and price increasing and profitability going up. So that's good for them if those policies are implemented. And then, around industrials and consumer spaces, there are idiosyncratic opportunities I think you can find. On the industrial side, some of the machinery names are finally finding a bottom after many years of downturn, right? Bus makers being one of them. On the consumer side, pharmacy chains, for example, face quite a lot of headwinds in the last couple of years because of policy crackdowns on the medical space. And they are seeming to finding a bottom and bouncing up as well. And so I think idiosyncratically, you have to sort of scatter the searchlight a little bit, but you can find bits and pieces of interesting opportunities in a market as big and deep as China.
John, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much. John Lin there, Chief Investment Officer of Emerging Markets, Value Equities and Chinese Equities at AllianceBernstein, joining us out of our Singapore studios here this morning. Just to recap some of the lines that we're hearing from President Trump as he makes his way to Gyeongju, South Korea, is that there seems to be some sort of things that he's looking at. He expects to lower fentanyl tariffs on China. And also when it came to rare earths, he mentioned that something could come out when it came to rare earths there. We're not short on details there for now, but they are going to make a big step when it comes to fentanyl and expects China to help with, of course, that drug crisis there. So at least what this looks like, that could be a quick win when it comes to the mainland. When it came to lowering that fentanyl tariff currently, it's an additional tariff of 20%. You have people expecting that could be lowered to 10% according to the Wall Street Journal. So we'll see if we get any more concrete details coming up the next few days as well. We'll bring you the latest coming up, plenty more ahead from the APEC summit. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back. You're watching the China Show. Here are some of the big earnings reports we're tracking. Ping An Insurance saw its profit up 11% in the first 9 months of this year. That's a stock market rally, of course, lifting investment returns and policy sales also expanding. Solid demand for savings products and higher margins also promise to bolster new business value for Ping An's life insurance operation. Shares are up, as you can see, 2.3%. All right, Jiangxi Copper shares are coming up on your screens as well, better by 3.5%. That's after third quarter net income beating the street here. Profit up 35% on year to just over 1.8. That's billion RMB. While the miner also seeing its revenue grow 14% from a year ago. Now turning attention to banks now, Bank of China seeing this 5% increase in third quarter profit as the lender managed to stabilize its net interest margins. This does come amid mounting challenges from weakening credit demand. You have net interest margin, a gauge of lending profitability, remained unchanged at 1.26% from the end of June. Right, check this out. Solar equipment maker Sungrow Power Supply, 57% jump, third quarter profits, beating estimates there. Revenue rising more than 20% amid strong demand for both domestically and also in overseas markets. Shares are going to see on your screens are effectively headed towards the sun, more than doubled in the past year, making it among the best performers in China's renewable energy sector. Right, we're looking at mainland markets, about going on 21 minutes, 30 seconds into the cash market session. It's still tech, small caps, and the overlap between leading your gains today, 0.8 to 1%. We've been hovering at about this flat line on the Shanghai comp for most of the first few minutes or so. We'll see what happens here, of course. But apart from all of that, we're still waiting on Big events, of course, in Korea. And Donald Trump, of course, he is headed there from Japan. He is on board Air Force One. And we understand, Yvonne, that we're still getting more lines coming through out of the U.S. president there. What do we know?
Yeah, making headlines here before even stepping down here on South Korean soil. That certainly is going to be interesting, right? So what we're hearing so far, our focus, he says, is on this China meeting on Thursday. Don't know if we'll be speaking about Taiwan with Xi. We do know what we've been reporting is that, President Xi seems to want to bring this whole Taiwan issue and to get Trump to maybe change its stance when it came to Taiwan. But seems like the president at this point is unwilling to mention if this is going to be a priority in these discussions on Thursday. Also talking a little bit more about Hamas as well. So, of course, we've seen the latest here when it comes to Gaza strikes here. And they say nothing is going to jeopardize the ceasefire of yet. And also talking about Israel has a right to retribution. So that was what was on in terms of the Middle East. And then also when it came to a meeting, a potential one maybe, a lot of questions about whether Kim Jong-un will be part of the picture here in South Korea. Trump says don't know if he'll speak at one point, come to a point in the future to meet with Kim. So right now, we're still not sure, but he mentions here we'll be speaking when it comes to Kim here. We'll come back at some point in the future. So maybe not this trip, but at some point I look forward to meeting with Kim Jong-un. That's been sort of the thing that we've been lingering here, whether our travel plans might have to change too if in fact we do see those pictures again of President Trump meeting with Kim on the border as well. Also, given the fact that given the Nvidia lines, and Jensen Huang is also expected to come here to Gyeongju as well, we'll be speaking about Nvidia's Blackwell chip with Xi. That also has been quite interesting, right? A lot of the focus has been on H20, not so much when it comes to Blackwell. So we'll see if any sort of announcements come through from there.
I'm looking at these headlines that you just went through, right? And we started getting these headlines, Yvonne, 15 minutes back. And just the range of topics that were covered here, everything from geopolitics to North Korea to Nvidia. Of course, in between you have now, at least, we do understand more about what our expectations should be around rare earths and fentanyl related tariffs, of course, in China. So yeah, it really sets us up very nicely going into the next hour here as we look ahead to that meeting scheduled for tomorrow. We'll get a view from Beijing, of course, with the Center for International Governance Senior Fellow Einar Tangen joining us in the next hour of the China show. And at some point, of course, in the next hour or so, President Trump is set, and Air Force One is set to land in Korea. Our team is there waiting, of course, to break all the lines coming through out of the APEC CEO Summit. That's just to say there is a ton ahead here on the China show. Welcome back. You're watching the China show. Here's a look at the CSI 300 half an hour into the cash market session. Hong Kong is shut, so our main and only proxy for sentiment across Greater China today are these mainland markets. We're looking at 0.3%. We're flatter on the Shanghai comp here. We're much higher when you look at the Chinex index. And yes, so we're still zeroed in on this upcoming meeting between President Trump and President Xi. U.S. President Donald Trump just left Japan about an hour or so ago. He is on board Air Force One, where we thought, and our entire newsroom thought, we could get this sort of brief period of quiet until he lands in Korea, and then the news just starts. But Yvonne, we were sorely mistaken there. These news lines are coming in thick and fast on everything out of the U.S. president as he makes his way, of course, from Japan into where you are there in Korea. Yeah.
I was going to joke that our studio here right now is right next to the HYBE booth, right? And you guys missed it on TV.
I saw the pictures.
But Rat Monster from BTS was just here with the founder of HYBE. And that was such a moment. And I was just...
Oh, let's do that.
That was what I really kind of thought was the most exciting thing. But yes, these Trump headlines certainly are putting the spotlight back on trade here at APEC once again, right?
Anyway.
What we heard in the last few minutes is quite interesting. You know what? I'm going to be looking for BTS sightings the whole time I'm here in Korea. Take a look when it comes to what we heard from Trump, though, right? Because It was interesting. We heard about fentanyl. So he says, when it comes to fentanyl, he expects to lower that tariff on China, right? 20% currently. That could be a quick win for China. What also could be another win is what we're hearing when it comes to Nvidia and this Blackwell chip. Trump says he will be speaking about Nvidia's Blackwell chip with Xi. Up until now, we've been talking about the H20 chips, the less advanced ones, which Trump said, the likes of, of Nvidia can actually ship to China, right? That was certainly rejected by the Beijing and told, the local companies out there to shun that chip, right? If we see any sort of breakthrough when it comes to Blackwell chips being shipped to China, I think that could be a substantial progress there. And certainly could be a win for Beijing. I'm not going to foresee it right now. Obviously, we're just speculating right now on what could happen. Right. But what we are hearing from Trump is that, rare earths, chips, fentanyl looks to be the top issues that we could see some sort of news. When it comes to Taiwan, he says he's not sure if President Xi's going to bring it up. And when it comes to North Korea, meaning Kim Jong-un, he said might not be. Maybe something in the future, he says. I think that's sort of what we've heard so far on Air Force One. And we're just moments away. I think maybe in the bottom of this hour, we're likely to see President Trump arriving here at Gyeongju.
Yeah, the remarks, in fact, just ended about a few seconds ago. I said, look, that seems to be all of it for now, and we'll wait, of course, until Air Force One lands, and of course we'll bring you those live pictures once, if they're available, and of course once they do. It's just also worth pointing out that one of the last things Donald Trump said in those remarks was he thinks we're going to have a great meeting with Xi. We've heard a lot about what the U.S. is getting out of this. What we haven't heard so far, and understandably so, is what China's getting out of this as far as that conversation goes. And we'll really get into that latter point at some point this hour as well, with our guests, of course, out of China. But that's just to say we can table that for now. Let's have a look at these markets right now. Mainland markets, 0.3% to the upside. We're looking at the Hynix index up about 1.3%, as you can see here right behind me to my left. Asia Pacific, we're doing very, very well. A lot of that is down to what's happening in tech. Japan, you have Advantest in there. Korea, you have SK Hynix story. We heard from Nvidia overnight. We heard about Blackwell. We heard from Jensen Huang talking about this is, I'm paraphrasing and simplifying it, but really pushing back against the notion that this is a bubble. You look at all the transactions and deals that have been done. And speaking of that very specific topic, Jensen Huang, APEC CEO Summit, and the deals we are expecting there, in fact, just from our Bloomberg sourcing, is that they're looking at one, or plural, with Hyundai Motor and Samsung. And all of this on your screens, 2% higher on the Kospi index right now. Very quickly, before I wrap things up with markets, a look at dollar China, 10-day look, another strong fixing coming through in the last hour out of the PBOC. And we're now back above 710 after briefly trading below that for the last, day or so on dollar onshore. Let's bring in Mark Cranfield right now with us out of Singapore to help us understand the mood music out there. Mark, I think Stephen Engel mentioned, I think it was Michael Bolton yesterday. Yvonne had to go with BTS today. Clearly upbeat music going into this meeting. What is the risk we don't see, Mark?
I'm expecting to see BTS jump out from behind Yvonne any minute right now with a dance routine to support this.
Yes.
The only thing that can really go wrong here is that the talks between Xi and Trump disappoint investors in the sense that it looks as though it's a step backwards rather than continuing to push things forward. It doesn't even need to be a hugely successful meeting. They just need to basically achieve most of the sound bites that we've seen so far look as though they're things that can be done, that can be confirmed, and the markets will be very happy with that. What they wouldn't want to see is that something gets dropped from this agenda and they come out and they say, well, we couldn't agree on Nvidia chips, or we couldn't agree on fentanyl. And that would be seen as a disappointment that would certainly spoil the short-term mood. But at the same time, when you've got earnings season going the way it is, people could forget about it reasonably quickly, providing we've got 3 huge tech companies reporting tonight after the FOMC. If they hit the ball out the park with their numbers, as some other companies have been doing, they'll probably forget about it again. But certainly short-term volatility would be very high if we get negative sounding bites that come out between the Xi and Trump meeting.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned the next 36 hours are going to be quite crucial, not just when it comes to what could come out of talks here between Trump and Xi, but you also have the Fed, ECB, you have BOJ meeting, you also have the MAX 7. I think 3 are reporting after the FOMC decision. So what do you think is going to be moving markets the most? What should we be focused on the most the next 3 days?
Well, the surprise momentum could come out of the Fed if they're expected to lower interest rates. That's certainly the case. But it's not certain that they will announce stopping the reduction in the balance sheet. That is a kind of a 50-50 decision. If they do that, if they do make it clear that they're going to stop reducing the balance sheet and before the end of this year, it could be pretty soon, or they may target a date around the December meeting, something like that. If they confirm it, that's not fully priced into the market, and that would be like an additional small interest rate cut as well, and that could just add fuel to what is obviously already a very hot equity market. So certainly there would be room for a bit more excitement from that, and we may well see a bit more flattening of the Treasury curve if that is the case. So certainly Treasuries have been pretty quiet all week, but certainly they could come to life if the Fed does say that it is going to stabilize its balance sheet around these levels.
Mark Cranfield, thank you so much. Our MLive strategist there on what to watch as far as the Fed is concerned. And if they do announce an end to QT, yours truly is still here. Anyway, coming up on the China show, The View from Beijing. We're front-loading banter because things are about to get serious and go up a notch here as we make our way into the thick of things here. Trump-Xi meeting, and of course the Center for International Governance joins us next with their outlook and their perspective. Einar Tangen joins us in a couple of minutes. This is the China Show.
I expect to be lowering that because I believe that they're going to help us with the fentanyl situation. We haven't talked about the timing yet, but we're going to work out something. We're doing very well with rare earth, as you know, and we're, I think, going to make a big step with fentanyl.
Welcome back. You're watching the China Show. You just heard there from U.S. President Trump comments literally in the last 30 minutes aboard Air Force One en route currently to South Korea, where Yvonne is, of course, for the APEC summit. We're just summarizing that. Those comments just ended about, what time is it now? We're looking at about just 10 minutes back, right? So we have various levels of certainty, 1 and 4, to uncertainty on what that something is as far as the rare earth story is concerned. But suffice to say, we now understand a little bit more about the sort of parameters and the different talking points that they'll be discussing. This is not sure, of course, the big question as it pertains to Taiwan, and merely maybe an observation. They talked about Nvidia, Blackwell, and the deals there as it pertains to Nvidia and China. An observation and merely just, I guess, a description, Yvonne, from Donald Trump, President Trump, that the U.S. is leading China and the world when it comes to critical technologies. Yvonne.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We are seeing some market reaction to some of these comments already, right? I'm looking at Nvidia. There's a line on the terminal now in the alt exchange. So we are seeing Nvidia actually rising some 8% after Trump mentioned this Blackwell comment that he's going to be discussing this Nvidia Blackwell chip to Xi Jinping when he meets with him on Thursday. For more, let's bring in Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance. Einar, certainly we've been hearing a little bit on Air Force One about what could be discussed, everything from fentanyl, from chips, even Blackwell chips from Nvidia. What do you think is going to be the most important thing that we could get out of here in Gyeongju between Trump and Xi?
Well, hopefully that there's going to be a period of some stability. China is slow playing the U.S. You had a huge climb down by Donald Trump talking about 100% tariffs or cutting off all trade with China, now talking about fentanyl and Blackwell chips. Don't be surprised if there's talk about a phase 2. He wants to deliver something for the farmers who have soybeans rotting in the fields. And it will be very good for business long term. It's not going to be a big package deal, but there's going to be enough there so that people say, okay, maybe we can predict and go forward with a few investments.
What would a win look like for China, Einar?
A win for China is eating up time. Right now, we have 3 years and another month or two with Donald Trump. He's mercurial. It's very hard to know where he's going to go. I think there's some shying away from a big deal because there's a concern that, like with Mexico and Canada, the big, beautiful bill and deal that is negotiated suddenly becomes horrible and needs to be changed. E.g., Trump would come back with more demands. So I think it's just slow playing. But as I said, this keeps the United States at the negotiating table and away from causing havoc. That creates more predictability, and I think that's really good for the markets.
Einar, David here. Is that something you think we can expect? Certainly there is a sense of stability and calm, and I think more importantly, visibility. Dare I say over the next 12 months, and I'm very careful at giving a specific time frame, but that does seem to be the case that this is probably the best, the status of this relationship is the best that I can remember, relatively speaking, of course, going back a couple of years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, David, and the reason you're thinking a year is you've been hearing banter around that China is going to extend the rare earths whatever agreement there is for a year. But don't count on them being willing to supply defense firms with, the kind of critical materials they need to make weapons and bombs that could be used against China. I think that's going to be a very, very difficult line for China to cross. But in terms of commercial uses, even dual uses, I think that China will see its way clear, at least on a 1-year basis, saying that they're going to check on things and make sure things aren't leaking into the defense sector. But that is all good because all of a sudden you have a playing field where Donald Trump isn't going from one extreme to the next. He's going to have to be focused and bear down on China, especially if there's a phase 2 deal and you start to see soybeans being picked out of the fields. That is good for everybody. I mean, there's a win-win. It's not about China winning or the U.S. winning. No one wins in a trade war. It's just a question of limiting the damage now.
Einar, what do you think worries the Chinese side?
David, right now, one of the biggest worries is Trump has been fairly mercurial in his meetings. They want to avoid an incident where he tries to insult Xi Jinping or China, says something that is just going to be taken the wrong way. If that happens, it's going to create a lot of damage. Everyone is on tender hooks about this issue. In terms of everything else, I think they've studied Donald Trump very carefully over the last 8 years. They think they have an understanding of how to deal with him. But, Donald Trump, he's the original madman tactics, so you can never really know exactly what's going to come next.
Yeah, and I think what really shocked the world the last few weeks, Einar, has been China and this whole sort of global licensing regime when it comes to critical minerals and rare earths. Yeah. Do you get a sense that China may have been a little bit too overconfident in this front here and really runs the risk of, disrupting supply chains as well as really prompting a lot of countries to diversify and reduce their reliance on China? Do you think that they've done enough to reassure some of these non-U.S. sort of nations here?
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of this thing. Right? Remember, Donald Trump was never going to go to the ASEAN or any of these meetings. He wasn't interested, made it very clear. The fact that he's there, even though he's not attending the meeting to meet with Xi, is very important. It shows that the balance has shifted, that there is some stability in the world. In terms of other countries, I think that's a little bit of a false narrative. The fact is, in 2008, 30 years ago, China's been at this rare earths game. Everyone was happy to let the dirty work be done in China. In 2008, there was a strategic white paper put out by the State Department saying that, Pentagon, saying that this was an issue. Rare earths are all bottled up there. It creates a bottleneck. And then in 2010, you had a situation where there was a boundary dispute with Japan. And in essence, they didn't declare that they weren't sending rare earths, but the rare earths weren't showing up in Japan. So the idea that this is somehow a huge surprise and no one knew that this was there is, I think, as I said, a false narrative.
Yeah, well, Einar, people tend to reset to what's convenient, right? Well, can I ask you then about that? Because I think Yvonne's question had an important point to be made, and I wonder what you think about this, right? So this is an imperfect analogy, right? So the rare earths for chips, one has the other card, the other one has the chips, advanced chips card. And, you know, the notion that the U.S. restricting China's access to advanced chips simply reinforce China's resolve to make itself more independent on that specific technology. And I think, what do you think? Do you think China doing something similar when it comes to critical minerals? Do you think that might bolster or in some ways backfire, in some ways bolster the external parties to increase their independence from China as it pertains to critical minerals?
Well, David, I think it's a mistake to assume that rare earths are the only arrow in the quiver for China. What China is doing is reminding the U.S. that it says we're going to restrict rare chips to you and chip making equipment by putting pressure on ASML. And then most recently, the U.S. put pressure in terms of saying, oh, we're going to seize. They made the Dutch seize this company. And this is causing shortages around the world. The point here is that they're underlining the fact that the world is complex. You cannot make these chips without these rare earth elements. So this idea that the U.S. can summarily decide what goes where is wrong. And this is the reset in Washington. They suddenly understand now that things are complicated, that there's a supply chain out there, that, you know, we say we won't sell you Boeing aeronautics equipment. Well, guess what they're made with? Rare earths. So, I mean, it's just underlining this fact. Hopefully people around the world understand that. China has no desire to punish other countries. They have number one trade relations with 140 countries. That's 3/4 of the world. So it's not a situation where punishing the world serves China. You know, they have to bring in resources and they have to add value and then ship them out again. So they're very much interested in a connected world. The question is the U.S.?
That's a fair point. In fact, just to underscore the point you just made there, Einar, you know, the U.S. used semiconductors for, you know, the same framework for many decades in semiconductors, and now is upset that China is using the same thing when it comes to this thing. Just very quickly, Einar, let's try and end on a fairly positive note. Do you think after this meeting, there's a possibility we'll get a formal invitation from Beijing for President Trump to visit China next year?
I do think so. I think this is a reset moment. This is going to go on. I mean, China's very interested in prolonging these negotiations. You'll notice a real pattern here where, these tariffs get put off for 90 days, another 90 days, et cetera. That's good for the markets. What you don't want is a real crisis point brewing up where they actually start, enforcing these kinds of restrictive tariffs. You know, from China's side, they'll be looking at getting rid of this tariff on their boats, or I should say fees on boats. Chinese boats are either operated or owned or made in China. They'll be interested in relief on tariffs and things like that. So this is going to be a transaction. Both sides are looking for things. Donald Trump wants to seal the TikTok deal. So it's going to be small things, but very encouraging for the markets, and also probably results in an invitation for Donald Trump.
Einar, fantastic, sir. Thank you so much for the time. As always, the insights are, thank you so much. Welcome there, Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance, joining us from Beijing today. There's plenty more here on The China Show.
All right, we're just hearing here at Gyeongju, the presenter talking about President Trump set to meet that speech here at the APEC CEO Summit later on here today. You're looking at live pictures out of Gimhae International Airport, where we are expecting President Trump to arrive on Air Force One on South Korean soil. So there you go. They are getting ready for him. Of course, the key thing is going to be today, the meeting with President of Korea, South Korea, Lee Jae-myung. So we're getting a little bit more from the South Korean side of things. The presidential office is talking about what could be discussed here. Trade and alliance modernization are some of the key topics that are going to be in these sort of negotiations here during this luncheon summit that we're hearing between President Trump as well as President Lee. We have U.S. officials did tell us there in earlier reporting that they were going to talk about things like bolstering AI cooperation, quantum computing, even 6G. These are certainly kind of new technologies and new ways that the U.S. is really trying to at least similar pacts that we saw, right, with the likes of Japan, likes of the United Kingdom recently here, and really signs of really to counter China here when it comes to advanced technology here at a time when you are seeing this rivalry between the two nations, Dave.
Yeah, everything seems to be ready, and the only thing lacking there, which I imagine will get filled in the next few minutes or so, is actually Air Force One. So the stairs are ready. What looks to be, there's the Beast, of course, and that whole entourage. In case you missed that, on one of the first scenes there, that looked to be the red carpet rolled up and perhaps going to be rolled out once the U.S. president does, of course, make his way and lands, Air Force One landing in. Just very quickly, in the meantime, though, we're looking at shares of, well, a couple of things. Toyota, very, very quickly before we wrap up the morning session over in the U.S. Bottom of your screens is the headline as far as Toyota is concerned. Apart from other things, markets are doing very well. Big tech play, big AI play, more on that in a moment.
Live pictures out of Gimhae International Airport here in South Korea, where we are just moments away when President Donald Trump expected to arrive in South Korea this hour as well to attend this APEC summit. And certainly what's going to be focused here is this next meeting with the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung at a time when they have been talking about, this trade deal, which President Lee mentioned with this conversation with Sherry just a few days ago, where there's still a lot of, short of details and really confirmation on some of these big issues as well. So this is really in contrast to some of the pacts that we saw in Japan, and certainly was a very fruitful trade deal that was discussed. You heard a little bit more in terms of some of the projects that the U.S. and Japan want to collaborate on here as well. And in particular, when it came to auto tariffs that were brought back and capped at 15% for Japan. If South Korea does not get a deal for the president, that could leave some of the Korean automakers at a disadvantage here, given those auto tariffs could stay at 25%. So that could be something that is certainly top of mind. But we're talking a little bit more about AI, quantum computing, even 6G. That was some of the things that might be discussed in this meeting coming up for lunch between the two presidents of South Korea and the U.S., Dave.
Yeah, this luncheon summit that's taking place. Well, I mean, even if they don't get that, I guess the other thing is, to your point in AI, right? Some of our sourcing and reporting does suggest that Nvidia might be coming in and doing a deal. I think it's separate with Samsung and separately with Hyundai. That's just to say we'll talk more about this. Jensen Huang, of course, will be playing also a big part with the CEO summit taking place there. Right. So I think we've just to dial back a little bit, taking a few steps back. So where President Trump is coming from, of course, is Japan. He is on his way en route and should be landing anytime in Korea. But in Japan, of course, and the conversations there, this fund, infrastructure, Toyota has been very much in focus there. So the company says it has not announced plans to invest $10 billion to build plants in the U.S., nor has it discussed a specific number with the White House. That's according to the company, and that's after the President Trump reiterated the company's investment into the U.S. while talking to reporters on Air Force One earlier on. For more on this, and for more clarity on the issue, what do we know, what do we don't know, our economics and government reporter Yoshiaki Nohara joining us out of Tokyo this morning. So, can I just start there? Like, what do we know? What don't we know about this Toyota deal?
So, of course, we know that President Trump made that remark that Toyota is going to invest $10 billion US dollars in the U.S., and he was encouraging people to buy Toyota cars. But it turns out that company hasn't announced yet. And David, you have to keep in mind also, there was a fact sheet released by Japan's trade ministry yesterday. And that list identified the potential promising projects for the $550 billion investment fund. But in that fact sheet, there was no projects involving car makers. So no Toyota projects, if there's any, not involved in that list of promising projects for the key investment fund.
That's good context and nuance to hit. Just because I guess we haven't heard from Toyota, hasn't announced it, doesn't mean we won't. What's the big picture? Where does this leave relations between the two following this trip?
Well, I think it's fair to say that Japan was able to make a good impression that it's moving ahead. It's a big step when they identify the specific projects that are under consideration for the investment fund. Because so far, there has been nothing concrete about and specific about how this is going to work out. But so now, at least they have these projects lined up, and it's now ultimately up to President Trump to decide which project he wants to see.
Yoshiaki, thank you so much. Yoshiaki Nohara there, our economics and government reporter in Tokyo for us. And just in the last few moments, we understand that Air Force One has, landed in South Korea. And of course, my colleague and co-anchor Yvonne Man is there in South Korea covering the story. Yvonne.
Yeah, so this is the big one, right? As we count down to more leaders that are going to be embarking here at Gyeongju, South Korea. Certainly, we've been talking about the logistics and how difficult it really is to get 20,000 visitors to this small city of so much cultural heritage. That's why it was chosen. But certainly, there you go. Smooth sailing when it comes to President Trump arriving here at Gyeongju on the back of what he has called a very great trip to Japan as well, where we did hear about some of these, pledges, as you mentioned as well. The meeting with President Lee from South Korea is going to be the next thing on the agenda. And then, of course, the big sort of event is going to be on Thursday when President Trump and Xi are going to meet. In terms of logistics, we're not even quite sure where this meeting is going to be taking place. So we might be scrambling a little bit as well. But you're hearing a little more on Air Force One, even before he landed, on what could be discussed, right? When he mentioned about fentanyl tariffs that could be lowered, that certainly could be a win for China from 20% to we don't know what level. The expectation, or Wall Street Journal at least has been reporting that it could be lowered to 10%. And these, of course, are on additional tariffs that have been put on top of already tariff rates for China. So that could be a small win for Beijing. What also could be something that could be substantial is the talk of Blackwell chips from Nvidia, and that President Trump will be discussing the Blackwell chip with Xi Jinping. Up until now, we've been talking about H20. Of course, President Trump has allowed the likes of Nvidia to, of course, once again, ship those H20 chips to the mainland, as long as the government gets a cut of it, of the sales. But China, of course, as we say in a pivot there, said, no need, right? We won't, urging companies not to take in those chips and actually rely on its own chips as well. Does the Blackwell chip, though, this is much more advanced. That could be a big game changer if, in fact, there is still going to be some news that come through on that front as well. But yes, looks like those are going to be the key issues. Rare earths, he mentioned, something could happen with China at this meeting as well, Dave.
Yeah, you know what? Let me just build on what you just said there on Nvidia, right? So after hours is done, we do have some trading, of course, and some proxies on the Alt exchange, for example. And I think Yvonne mentioned this in case our viewers missed that. And the proxy I'm using now that is trading, if I could ask my producers to bring NASDAQ futures up, we're now looking at 82 points to the upside. So just to underscore some of the market moving and market reaction to just very, very basic comments coming through out of Air Force One with Donald Trump earlier on. 81 points in NASDAQ futures. We're looking at the Alt exchange. I think, we closed higher overnight. And in fact, we are now looking at 8.5%. Well, we were looking at 8.5% after those comments on Blackwell from the U.S. president. Just to recap what you're seeing on your screens, the U.S. president and Air Force One, just a few minutes back, touched down in South Korea. It's taxiing right now into the Bay, into where we are, where this whole welcoming committee has been waiting in deceivingly very cold weather. It's my understanding of where we are right now as far as that's concerned. There's a band waiting. Whether or not we get the same song and dance that we got when he landed in South Korea, in Malaysia, is another thing altogether, perhaps not more important there. We are also looking at, because the entourage is there, We did catch a glimpse of the beast. That's the car, of course. And we're also looking at the red carpet. And we are, in fact, by the looks of things, I'm just eyeballing this. We're judging by the fact that you are getting the shadow of those, of the stairs. There we go. Okay, so we are getting very close to the U.S. president making his way out of Air Force One. That's all just to say, while he was on air, in the air, on the way to South Korea, to reiterate some of the news coming through there, Donald Trump says he expects a great meeting with China's Xi Jinping. The relationship with China is very good. One of the remarks coming through out of the U.S. president, he says that a meeting with President Xi will have a very good outcome for our country and for the world, and he expects to solve a lot of problems. So we do understand, in terms of my expectations based on the phrasing of some of these headlines, do expect some news on fentanyl, some progress, I'm using that very loosely, some progress on rare earths. President Trump also mentioned he does not know whether Taiwan will come up, of course, in those talks as well. But that's just to say, Yvonne, these have been really market-moving comments and really sets the stage for what has already been a very busy few hours. And I imagine, Yvonne, that's going to go up a notch or two once things really get underway there where you are.
Yeah, this is just Wednesday. We haven't even talked about Thursday when these two leaders actually meet. That's going to be the big thing as well. We talked about, the meeting with Lee Jae-myung is really just the appetizer. The main course comes on Thursday when Xi and Trump meet. But as you mentioned about the Taiwan issue, it seems like the U.S. is downplaying that this is going to be a top priority. He's not sure if President Xi is going to bring it up, but it seems like Trump, and at least the U.S. side of things, is unwilling to really go there when it comes to the Taiwan issues. He says there's not that much to ask about Taiwan. What we also didn't hear was about North Korea. I think reporters did ask him, is Trump looking to meet with Kim Jong-un during his trip to South Korea and head to the border? He said, look, maybe something in the future. Maybe not this time. So at least on those sides, the defense side, security side, that certainly is one thing. But it seems like it's really focused on, as you mentioned, the trade aspect of things, whether it is on fentanyl, about tariffs, and whether we are going to see, of course, a 90-day truce that's going to be extended and bring this trade war essentially to 2026. That's really going to be the key thing for the market as well. Those are sort of the low-hanging fruit, right? Can we see an extension of this trade truce, and whether tariffs are going to be even on the table when it comes to 100% tariffs that were threatened just a few weeks ago when China did ramp up the temperature when it came to these export curbs. Export curbs around rare earths, we talked about, is going to be key here, whether we do see some sort of, watering down of these curbs, whether it's on rare earths, whether it's on the U.S. side, the export of a software, for example, which kind of led to the latest flare-up here. But both sides have really, in the last couple of hours and days, have really been bringing the positive vibes. I think the People's Daily, this is the official Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece, mentioned yesterday about we hope that we can meet in the middle. Right, that they can reach some sort of consensus or some sort of compromise on these very sticky and sticking point issues here. But there you go. We are seeing Air Force One aligning with that staircase there. So we are expecting the president to step down here as well and arrive here in Gyeongju. So there is a lot at stake here, but certainly right now we are seeing continued positive vibes, Dave.
I mean, it really is. And I think a reset, the notion of this reset is really coming to, I think, literal fruition when we see them together tomorrow. Now, in terms of the substance and what each side walks away with, we really have a good understanding now of the diplomatic wins and the low-hanging fruit. And it seems to me we'll be getting progress on that, right? So things like the tariff there was an additional tariff that was set to take effect at the end of this week that doesn't seem to be part of the conversation now. We could even get a lowering of the fentanyl-related tariffs. The thornier issue seems to be, well, at least the foundation to discuss that still seems to be, the jury's still out on that one as they roll out the red carpet. That's just to say that to the point that our guest earlier on shows was making, Einar Tangen out of Beijing, that Beijing is slow playing Donald Trump, that it is not so much in the interest, let me just rephrase that ever so slightly, in the event that these talks don't go as the news flow is expecting them to and suggest that they will, it won't be as bad of an outcome for the Chinese side, an extension, if you will, as far as that's concerned. That's just to say, let me just crowbar in the other big story that we were talking about today. It's perhaps not a coincidence that this detailed roadmap, it did, of course, happen. The fourth plenum, the 5-year plan is out. We did also just get that overnight and yesterday, Tuesday afternoon, a detailed document outlining China's blueprint to elevate consumption to become a bigger part of the economic pie. That's not a short-term measure. It's a longer-term blueprint, and that goes into what not just the U.S. has asked. China's trading partners have asked to rebalance the economy in favor of greater consumption. The reason I say it's not a coincidence because that actually goes into many of these major issues longer term that these two economies have been discussing, negotiating over, and we'll see. We'll see what these talks hold. But before we get to the point, right, we have this luncheon coming through, and of course we're still waiting, Yvonne, for the U.S. president to actually come out of Air Force One.
Yeah, as you mentioned, right, you got to wonder, does this trade war in some way, help or hurt President Xi? And some could argue that China is in some ways winning in this trade war because they've been able to leverage the likes of soybeans, leverage the likes of rare earths as a key weapon in this trade war. And it's been effective in some ways in really getting President Trump to want to meet and give some concessions, right? If this whole Blackwell chip comes into fruition, where Nvidia can ship those chips to China, that would be a major concession on the part of the U.S. But as you talk about, right, this grand bargain that people have been talking about, that sort of reality seems to be fading a little bit as we get closer, just given all these kind of long-standing issues between the two nations. And what people say is more realistic could be just a series of small deals, right? Short-term fixes over time between the two, just given the structural sort of issues that are still at play here. And there is a lot of talk, as you mentioned, about self-reliance, as you mentioned about, being this sort of techno-nationalist sort of industrial superpower. This has been a long project of President Xi for the past decade or so. And you heard that in that 14th five-year plan that they really kind of chose this in the face of external threats there over really boosting consumption. So I think at one point it is going to be a big question for China. Are you going to choose between self-sufficiency or actually boosting consumption to stabilize growth? But there you go. You're seeing President Donald Trump there greeting the South Koreans as he, of course, embarks and steps out of Air Force One. Certainly this is on the back of his trip to Asia, Malaysia. Yesterday was Japan, which, both of these trips have been very, very positive in terms of what was achieved there, right? And really, you are seeing a flurry of deals that the president has been at least agreed to with ASEAN, with, of course, the new Prime Minister of Japan, Takaichi there. And certainly there has been this momentum behind the U.S. As he, of course, embarks in South Korea. So at least for now, you are seeing more engagement from the U.S. in this part of the world. And we'll see, right? President Trump is there. There you go, greeting the leaders. And certainly we're expecting that luncheon to happen in just a few moments as well with President Lee Jae-myung. But there is going to be a lot hanging there, with President Trump, and really could be really agreed upon with China, right? We need something of substance. We need to quantify, the number of soybeans that China is going to purchase. We need that in order for, the global investment community to really see, yes, something came out of this, and that we are actually seeing some more progress.
It's worth pointing out that, he's coming from Japan. He's in South Korea now. These are two U.S. allies, of course. And in terms of just the economic relationship and trade ties between the two, there had been a very deliberate exercise on the part of, obviously, the teams involved here to really bolster those economic ties, right? Whether that's FDI from Japan into the U.S. We just talked about Toyota just now. On the part of rare earths, for example, and critical materials, there has been, if you look at the specific news flow and some of the deals that have been announced very recently on that goes into also U.S. efforts and its allies' efforts to really, I guess, in some ways, take a step back as far as the reliance on the Chinese ecosystem is concerned. Now, what we don't know so far is to what extent, even if we will get a pause, a one-year pause in rare earths, and if we do get one, what does that actually look like? Because we haven't even formed the sort of details around what the current framework is, something that did catch markets off guard about 2 or 3 weeks back. It certainly almost threw a spanner in the works as far as the conversation goes, because he had this recent tit for tat and re-escalation and de-escalation, which shortly followed days after that. So we'll see what happens there as far as this is concerned. But yes, you are looking at live pictures out of Gimhae Airport in South Korea, where the U.S. President and Air Force One just landed. I would say about 10 minutes back, he's emerged from Air Force One. He's made his way down into the car. What you're not going to see is him lining up at immigration. I've actually yet to see a world leader get off a plane or get on a plane and get into line in immigration. Anyway, that's just to say, of course, the red carpet has been rolled out for the U.S. president. It's going to be a very busy few hours there for Donald Trump and his team. Not to mention, what we've talked about a lot is the political side of things. This is the APEC CEO Summit. So as far as markets go, it's the deals between those companies involved. And there's an extremely long list of corporate heads and VIPs that are in the same place in the world to talk us through these various deals. And one of which I invite our viewers to read this: Nvidia, Samsung Electronics, and Hyundai Motor. Anyway, we can look at these pictures, and I believe we will leave this here for now, as he makes his way, of course, from Air Force One into the next mode of transport. For our Bloomberg clients, you can check this out on your terminal. TLiveGo is the function you run. For more context on this, I believe there should also be another functions as well. Suffice to say, we'll keep on top of the coverage. In the next hour, we are expecting the U.S. president, of course, to give that keynote speech. Plenty more ahead. This is The China Show.
We're currently assuming China is going to be 0% of our business. And if it comes back, if President Trump was able to negotiate, or if China would like us to come back to China, it's going to be a huge bonus for us.
My script says to tell you that's Jensen Huang. I don't need to tell you that. Anyway, of course, the company has announced it's teaming up with Uber, Palantir, and CrowdStrike, among others, to ensure its technology remains at the heart of the AI frenzy. Nvidia's tie-ups reflect its increasingly global ambitions. That the company is planning this $1.2 billion data center in Germany with Deutsche Telekom. Huang is also said to unveil packs, and I think we alluded to this earlier a few minutes back, with the likes of Samsung and Hyundai when visiting South Korea, of course, for this big meeting that's taking place there. And yes, it really segues us nicely into where you are, Yvonne. And it's not just extremely cold, it's extremely busy, and a lot of the deal teams are out and about today. What's going on there? What's the agenda looking like there?
Yeah, well, what you're trying to see is that Nvidia is definitely going to be on a business trip and talking to a lot of the Korean tech names that you mentioned there. But also, it seems like the lobbying that he's done for the past, I want to say, year has been quite successful, right? The fact that they're bringing this whole Blackwell chip into discussions with President Xi is going to be a big deal. But does this run the risk of really angering some of the hawks among the Trump administration around national security and the like? That certainly is going to be a key focus here within the Trump administration as well. So there you go. We're also learning a bit more about the menu that they're going to have between President Lee Jae-myung of South Korea.
Tell us about it.
Tell us about it. I love this. So they're talking about appetizer featuring Thousand Island dressing. This is a nod to, of course, New York City and the Trump's roots there, followed by a 3-course Korean menu using Gyeongju rice, seasonal produce, and local specialties. And yes, dessert going to be gold themed, of course, Dave.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Oval Office themed, if you think about it. Yeah, right? If you look at the backdrop there in the Oval Office. So, featuring Thousand Island dressing. Okay, I'm glad it had the word featuring in there, not just simply Thousand Island in a cup. Check your cholesterol if that's the case. But yes, Yvonne is going to be very, very busy there. There is a luncheon, of course, and we understand that from the South Korean side that is going to be taking place in the next hour. U.S. President Trump is set to, of course, speak, where Yvonne and our whole team is. In fact, Sherry's there, and I believe she's been complaining about the cold the whole time, right? Just just to dress up, put some stuff on, Sherry.
It is cold.
But apart from that, we understand it is very, very. How cold is it? How cold is it? I've gotten complaints about this. How cold is it, Yvonne? Tell us the truth.
I'm wearing 3 layers. I borrowed my mom's big puffy jacket that has a bit of much needed fur. So I'm ready. I'm ready to be out and about. Right now we're being bask in the warmth of the lights here inside the Arts Center of Gyeongju, but certainly it is going to be quite cold. I think single digits. We're not used to that in Hong Kong, right, Dave?
No, not at all. Not at all. The warm embrace of artificial heating. The good thing, though, is we're almost done with the show, and we're going to bring the temperature down on this geopolitical thermometer, and hopefully that is a stage and foundation that we can build on this bull one. So we will see you all tomorrow. That's it from us here on the China Show. There's plenty more ahead. We'll continue our coverage of the APEC Summit in South Korea. This is the China Show. Thank you for joining us today.